It's so good. It's been 2 years since I've been on the stage, or maybe not quite 2 years, but a long time, because I, with Marilyn Grevstad, were two of the storytellers for services at this church. So I'm so pleased that we were able to have this event here, connecting my storytelling community with my church community. I'm going to tell a story about my grandfather. His name was really Rollo Eklund, but when I was a little kid, like many young'uns do, I gave him a different name. My grandmother was Anna, but I called her Gamby. And I went to a movie and saw Jungle Jim, and ever after that, my grandfather was Jim, and everyone else called him that too, even though his name was Rollo Eklund. When I was a teenager, or a preteen, I guess, I lived with my grandpa and my mother in a little house in South Central Los Angeles. In those days, my mother was working full-time and going to school at night, and on weekends she was studying, so I didn't have much of her attention. But my grandfather was there all the time when I was not in school or playing with my friends, visiting with friends. So he was my primary connection and companion. But I had so many complaints about him. Mom, I would say, why does he get up at 5:30 in the morning? It's so early. And she would say, he grew up on a farm, and the roosters would wake him up at 5:30, and then he had chores to do. That's why. Well, it didn't work for me. I still had to face getting up at 5:30 when I didn't want to. The other thing that was very annoying was he would walk around, shuffle around the kitchen saying, boo, 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 I'm the chief bottle washer and cook here. And I hated that. Later, I realized it was because it was sort of, he was demeaning himself in some way, and I didn't like that. At the time, I didn't realize that we had a very wonderful part of our relationship. But you know, when you're a kid, sometimes you don't appreciate the best things that happen. I played the piano. I was talented that I had a very good ear for music, and I could pick up tunes so easily. And he had a wonderful voice, and he knew all the old songs like Casey would waltz with a strawberry blonde, and some of you are shaking your heads. Some of you who are in the elder realms, as I am. And I just love those old songs. Now, my mother took me to concerts, and I think my musical talent later developed was partly because of that, but I hated that because they were long and I was so bored. But I loved every one of these old songs. Honeymoon, I Wonder Why You Set So Soon, and Casey would waltz with a strawberry blonde. So I would play and sing these songs. We spent hours with this, me playing the piano, and sometimes he just listened to me sing, and sometimes he sang along. But at the time, I just took it for granted, really. Oh, that's how it is. You know how kids can do sometimes. You don't know to be grateful until time passes and you grow up and learn about gratitude. I wish I had known so much more about my grandfather's life than I did. Had I known what I'm going to tell you about him, I know I would have had so much more respect and love for him than I did. And it just points out to me and to all of us how valuable it is for people to do memoirs, to tell their stories to their families. What a difference it can make. But don't wait till a person passes away and you discover, like I did, his memoir hidden in my mother's papers. He was a fine writer. He was good at describing things, and as he wrote his memoirs, he noted the songs that were popular in that day and the political events that were happening too at that time. It was a very enjoyable read. I learned so many things that I had always wished I had known before. Yes, he did grow up on a farm. That was true. And some relatives had invited him to join them, and they were farmhands. But he sort of rose up the ranks quickly. There were hogs on one farm that had some kind of terrible illness, and they were just dying. Well, he had worked with horses a bit, and he knew there was a remedy that worked for horses, so he tripled it for the hogs. And he said, well, hogs won't die of things you feed them. They eat anything. And it was true. The hogs got well, and no one of them died. So he went up in the estimation of the farm community there. And later on, he got a job in it was probably the finest farm in a community outside of Chicago. He didn't say where that was exactly, but he went to work for them, and they found that he was excellent working with horses. And I know I have loved horses and ridden them when I was younger, and I know they're very sensitive to feelings that people have. And so he was able to calm the most nervous horses, and I'm proud of my grandfather for doing that. After a while, one day, he happened to look over at the big house where there was a party going on. At the time, he was dating a young woman, but now he saw a woman that just captured him completely. She was sitting chatting with other women there, and so he managed to get into that party and help serve the ice cream. They were hand cranking ice cream, and he helped serve it and met the person who was going to be his great love, my grandmother, Anna Lech. She was apparently the most popular and beautiful woman in that county, and she had a lot of suitors, and he was just a farmhand. So he had not a lot of hope, but he was lucky because Anna's father really liked him, all that work with the horses and everything, I guess, and said he would loan him a carriage to take my grandmother on a date because he didn't have any carriage, and the other suitors, more wealthy than he, could take her out to many different places. So they started dating. The first place he took her was a chicken dinner at a family home somewhere. And then he took her to Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, which was very popular at that time, and other events. And gradually, he loved her more and more, and she fell for him. But he knew that he could not marry her if he didn't have a good living, and he did not, as a farmhand, earn a good living, even though he was at the top of that game. So he went to Moline, Illinois, to a business college, and studied all the different parts of mathematics and business and everything. And Mr. Toland ran that cottage. And that business school. And was so impressed with him, he kind of moved up and started teaching there after not a very long time. And when Mr. Toland retired, he gave my grandfather the business college. He gave it to him, which is impossible, but is miraculous, really. I'm going to back up for just a moment because there's an important thing I need to tell you before I continue with the story, and it's that in my grandfather's memoir, when he was a young man, well, he was a 10-year-old, he belonged to a gang called Little Potatoes, Too Hard to Peel. And the other gang was called the Bluff Gang. They were the East Enders. He was a West Ender. And they didn't, of course, have knives and guns. They beat each other up on a regular basis, I guess. And his mom asked him to go and pick up something at a pharmacy he had to cross East Ender territory to get there. And he was worried, dangerous. He was by himself. But he got through okay, and he picked up whatever she asked him to buy. But on the way back, there was the Bluff Gang, the East Enders, and they were gonna beat him up. But this black kid, Billy Todd, stepped in front of them, and he said, "Hey, you ain't gonna beat up this white boy. He ain't got his gang with him. That ain't fair." So my grandfather was saved the day. Connecting it with the business college now, once he was in charge and his college became very successful. He married my grandmother's. He had the money to do it and the position in the community, and they had a very nice house with even a servant. And she helped him run the college. She was very smart, and she taught some of the classes there. Well, at one point, a colored, what they called colored girl, wanted to go to that college, and that was unheard of. But my grandfather told the students and the faculty the story of this kid saving him from getting beaten up, and they all voted to let her join. She might have been the first black woman to ever be accepted into a business college there. I believe that's quite possible. Things were very successful for quite a while. My mother was born, and it went on that way, success and comfort and all those nice things. But then my grandfather and grandmother realized they were getting so many students, they wanted to expand the college. So they invested, or thought they were investing, in a good deal that was generated by someone that my grandfather met somewhere. But the guy swindled them out of all their money. So they lost everything, the home, the college, the whole thing. Well, my grandfather was continuously resourceful, this man, it's amazing. He went to work for the Underwood typewriter company. And once again there he rose right up in the ranks, and he was promoted to be the head of the New York department. So my mother and grandmother were moved into a pretty nice apartment house in New York. And she was now about 16 years old. But one day the Depression hit, and everyone lost their jobs and couldn't pay rent. So there was a day when my mother and my grandmother came home to the apartment to find all of the belongings of all the tenants on the street. They had been evicted with no notice, just dumped out there. A friend of hers said they had found a tenement to stay in when my mother went with them, and it was kind of a crummy place to live, but that's what they had. She met my father, and he was a violinist. He didn't use music. I mean, he didn't read notes, but he could play anything that he heard on his violin. So they became a couple, but they didn't have, the story goes, they didn't have the dollar to get a marriage license. So they did not get married. But my mother did get pregnant with me. And my grandmother did not want her to starve, and the only possible place she could think where my mother would have a decent food and place to stay was her sisters had a little farm in Arkansas. There were about 3 sisters that owned this farm, and they would have plenty of food because they grew it themselves. So they moved to Arkansas. Meanwhile, my grandfather had gone back to Moline, Illinois to raise up a few pennies that he could help support the family with, but he wasn't very successful. I was born on the way to that farm in Council Bluffs, Iowa. And I feel so grateful that I grew up on a little farm with 3 doting aunties. And we had chickens and a cow, and I would call the cats in the evening. The cow, my grandmother would get a big dishpan, and then the cow would put milk in there. And I would call the cats, and my grandmother said I was the best caller of cats ever. And they would all come with their tails waving, and then they get their little faces with milk all over the nose and the whiskers, and they were happy, and so was I. We had banty hens, and so I was given 2 baby chicks, a yellow and a black one, and to keep the cats from getting at them, we put them in a Quaker Oats box and with holes in the top. So I had my little pets, and we had a cow. And I used to wander through the cornfields. It looked like it was in this golden forest. I loved living on that farm with those aunties. I feel so blessed that I had that. But they couldn't stay at the farm because my grandmother and mother really didn't want to live off of her sisters all the time. And my mother had a lot of skills. She had gone to that business college and by this time was quite skilled in shorthand. And they had heard there were jobs out in California, so we all moved out to California. Now the story does go on from here, but I'm going to close this story because the main thing that I wanted to share about my grandfather is how important his memoir was to me, and just to remind everyone how important it is to share your stories with your family. Don't wait till you're gone and leave it, share it now if you can. And I know many of you will because there are a lot of storytellers here. And so I'm going to leave you with that thought. And this is a memoir to my grandfather. I never got to memorialize him, so this is it. Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to honor Patty Zeitlin. And Pat, you've all seen her at almost every single event that this guild has held in the last, I don't know, she says it was 20 years ago that she went to a guild event and heard Naomi and Pat Peterson telling stories, and she was hooked. And she's been in the guild, going to All for Kids and our other venues all the way along. 7 years ago, she joined the board, and as a very brand new board member, organized Celebration. She told, Deborah Harris Brannon told, Elaine Bays, is it Elaine? Lorraine Bays and Kathy Alexander and Norm. And with Pat as MC, if you weren't there, you missed something really big. And Patty organized that as a new board member. As a board member, she's been vice president. She's been liaison to the dance group here, making sure we get our dates. She's worked with other venues like the Methodist Church and negotiated prices and times and all that. She's been a really big help to the board for all that kind of thing. But even more, at our meetings, she uses her compassionate communication skills to make sure that every single person is heard and everybody listens well to each other. It's a skill that we don't all have and that we're very grateful for this calm presence who keeps us on task listening. It's very important. Now, Patty was in Hawaii too, and she's bringing us a story tonight. This is a thread, and Jill too, I think, and so I don't know, Allison maybe too. Hawaii's a big deal, but she grew up in the Los Angeles area and went in for music and singing and has recorded 8 CDs that are still available. She's written books, songbooks for kids, and been active in theater and musical groups, and thank goodness for us, in storytelling. And this has been a great benefit not only to the Guild, but to her church, and her active participation in our story swaps. Here at the church nearby that Cynthia Westby started, and that she took over when Cynthia couldn't continue, found another venue, and has been encouraging both experienced tellers, but encouraging the new tellers in this space, making it safe for all of us to practice our stories and get feedback in a very safe environment. And we really thank her for that. And I probably haven't said it all, But we also want to have time for stories. So she wants you to know that in a month, next month, she will be, just guess which birthday it is. In your brain, she said I could say, she will be 83 years old, and she still has plenty of stories to tell.
Yay.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness she still has many stories to tell. And
Oh, I'm very touched by receiving this award, really, and from a person that I admired and still do, because he was one of my mentors, as were Naomi and Pat and Larry, John Wasco. These are people that taking workshops helps a lot, but hearing great storytellers, and Judith, she was one of the ones I remember, just learning so much from listening to her and watching her. We learn a lot by watching and listening other great storytellers tell. Thank you so much.